ceases to function. Descartes, continuing his analysis, came to the conclusion that in the brain there was an unpaired organ, that instead of the organ being polarized or with two essential parts corresponding to the right and left sides of the brain, that was suspended almost in the middle of the brain, suspended in a manner in which it was capable of motion within the brain itself. A comparatively small and mysterious body, which resembled perhaps a small pine cone, and that this mysterious body, with an independent motion, held in position only by certain arteries and veins and nerves, was, in his mind, the most likely organ or center by means of which consciousness was able to impinge itself upon the body as a living structure. Therefore, that life came essentially from the heart. But from this other center came the power which transforms a living thing into a thinking, conscious being. He probably, Descartes, was not merely conjecturing, not in the ordinary sense of invention. He was a very thoughtful man, a very widely read man, and a great student. There is no doubt in the world that he was well acquainted with the religious, philosophical, and scientific thoughts of ancient peoples. And while perhaps he did not have available as large an area of research as we have today, he had enough to convince him that throughout ancient religions and mystical philosophies there was a lore or legendary by means of which the isolation of the area which he selected would be natural, reasonable, and probable. Perhaps Descartes did not even consciously do this, but out of his vast background, this thinking was almost inevitable as a subconscious process in himself. From the very earliest time, men have used the concept of the I, in this case E-Y-E, as a symbol of consciousness, of internal awareness. In India, an extra eye, a third eye, is placed on the forehead or higher upon the head of a deity to indicate, one would say, a power of superior sight, knowing, or insight. In the religious mysticism of Christianity, the head itself is surrounded by the nimbus of sanctity. Now, Descartes was a Roman Catholic, and therefore it is quite reasonable and probable that he was aware of the ancient symbolism associated with the canonization of a saint. Now, all through art, not only Christian art, but also Buddhist art and the arts of other Oriental peoples, sanctification is artistically presented or represented by adding around the head of the person a halo. In the development of the idea of canonization, developed quite a science of halos. All halos, aureoles, and similar luminous envelopes or surrounding light patterns are according to certain rules or designs. If you study ancient art, you will see, for example, that the persons of the Trinity, representing the Godhead, if personified, are usually given a certain kind of halo. that the halo of Christ is different from that of any of his apostles, and that the halos of saints are again different from those of angels, archangels, or other so-called celestial beings. Descartes was undoubtedly aware that if he took the halo around the head and regarded it as an area or a circumference, and he placed a compass so that he could draw this halo, which the artist placed around the head, that the central point of his compass, upon which he was to base the circumference, would lie in the head or approximate the position in the skull of the pineal gland. Therefore, that this luminosity was radiating from a center almost in the exact middle of the brain. Now, this luminosity we conceive of, probably, as being simply an art symbolism. And I think certainly it would be so regarded by most scientists. At the same time, these symbols are archetypal. They go back to a very ancient pattern in human thinking. Therefore, I don't believe that we can simply assume that these symbols are arbitrary. Rather, the ancient attempted to indicate by the halo or aura around the head a state of sanctity. He did not put this aura somewhere else. Strangely enough, he did not put it around the heart. Sometimes, of course, he will make a larger halo. And in Eastern, particularly Buddhist symbolism, it is quite common to find a double halo. One obviously from the heart, the other from the brain. These two halos form a very pleasant artistic design and are noted in the shrines and images of many of the Buddhistic divinities. However, the halo around the head is derived from rather ancient thinking and from a still older patterns of belief or attitude. In the Egyptian religion, for example, we find a definite use of a peculiar kind of ornament that is placed on the exact crown of the head, a tiny little mound-like structure resembling a tiny beehive. And on the top of this is placed, usually, a conventionalized lotus blossom or lotus branch. Now, we say branch, fully realizing that that is not the way we generally recognize a lotus. But in Oriental art, it is usually a peculiar type of hybrid in which the lotus symbol is combined with a type of stem and leaf that suggests the acanthus rather than the lotus itself. Now, in this particular case, the deceased person passing into the underworld has this peculiar device fastened to the top of the head. The deities involved are frequently ornamented with crowns or symbols. And these symbols include a mysterious something resembling a kind of antenna placed in the top of the crown of the deity, approximately in the same relationship as the feather in the hair dress of the Indian medicine priest. Now, in American Indian lore, the war chieftains always wore the bonnet. This was a circle, usually, of eagle feathers, forming a very elaborate headdress. This bonnet often also included an appendage of more feathers down the back until perhaps almost reaching the ground. But a mystic, a medicine priest, or a holy man could not wear this bonnet. That was the bonnet of the war chief. The symbol of the holy man was a single feather rising directly from the top back of the head, exactly where if the stem of the feather continued into the head, we would assume the pineal gland to be. This was a sign of divine protection. It was a sign of dedication to God. This feather, by the way, served a number of protective purposes. For in the old tribal warfare, the chieftain with the war bonnet was always vulnerable. Anyone who wanted to take a shot at him could do so. But it was very bad taste to shoot the man who had one feather in his hair, because it meant you were shooting a priest. Therefore, normally, no one attacked him. And actually, he never carried arms himself. He was sacrosanct. He was set apart. And to injure the agent of the deity was a very serious offense. Descartes also well knew that from very old times the tonsure was an important symbol, not only in Christian religion, but in other religions. This consists of shaving or removing the hair from a small circle at the crown of the head. This was again a setting aside of the individual for religious purposes. It was a very peculiar but important symbol. Some feel that it was an effort to capture an idea, and that this idea was that the child's skull in small childhood or infancy did not entirely and immediately close, but that at the crown of the head, through small childhood, there was a soft area where the skull bones had not joined. And it was a belief among many gypsies and other people that all children were clairvoyant until this skull closed over. Therefore, again, there was something mystical about this area in the top of the head. Down in the Casa Grande area in our own southwest, the dead were buried in what was called the embryo posture, which is a kind of knee-chest posture, as the embryo is supposed to be in the womb. This was in order to emphasize the belief that the dead person or deceased person was beginning a new infant life in the other world. Therefore, that he was being born into another world, and that the earth became the second womb of his life. When he was so placed, a bowl was inverted over his head, forming a kind of cap. But before this was done, a hole was knocked in the bottom of the bowl, so that there would be a space at the top of the head through which his soul might escape. The belief being that the soul left the body at that area at the crown of the head. This, of course, is completely carried on in the religion and philosophy of Vedanta and Yoga. In the Mexican Museum of Archaeology in Mexico City, there is a magnificent monolithic head, probably of Mexican jadeite. This head is called Morning Star. It is more than twice life-size, perhaps 4 times life-size. But there never was any body with it, because the undersurface of it is also carved and figured. Where the neck would join, there are elaborate glyphs covering the entire bottom of the head. And the heads of this nature, even larger, have been found along the coast of Mexico on the Gulf side south of Veracruz. The top or headdress of this figure, Morning Star, is a magnificent sunburst resembling a many-petaled lotus, almost identical in design to that frequently found on the cases of Egyptian mummies. It is as though an inverted lotus bowl had been placed over the head. In the center of the area, where the petals came together, was an open circle, the Chinese symbol of life, the vacant center in the mysterious Chinese plaque, which was used to represent deity. And in the case of the mummy, the Egyptian mummy, this central circle was usually painted deep blue, an azure color, to symbolize heaven or life or consciousness. We can go through 50 such parallels.